And we're live.
I think so. Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday evening. We're a little late here because we were talking shop. Sorry about that. We're going to be, if you're here for the main show, skip ahead about 24 minutes. I always feel like I have to say that. So that way when people watch it on a next recording or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a courtesy thing.
Yeah, but you also did a good job in I think you did it on YouTube where you actually, put the place markers in for that stuff.
Yeah.
So that they can skip it if they don't want to hear us BS through it.
Yet another thing that I've added to my post-show checklist.
Yeah, it's not even a post-show checklist anymore. It's a post-show paper. It's a white paper of stuff.
Yeah, no kidding. I didn't actually add it to that list. I'm doing that now. Comment on Facebook with timestamps.
He's BSing his kids.
Whew.
Oh, that's funny.
Cool, how are you this evening, Blake?
I'm pretty good. I can't complain. It's been fun. So this is one of those weeks in my cycle of design lab stuff where I'm getting a bunch of brand new students, and it's always really fun and inspiring because you get people that have come from all sorts of different places to get into user experience and learn more about UX research and for a lot of people, I'm the first person to introduce them to human factors. So it's a fun time. I just like it. It always feels reinvigorating. But how about you, man? How's everything going?
It's good. It's been a busy week, and I'll talk about this on our one more thing and in the show. But yeah, it's been a very busy week. If you're following along, if you're watching on Twitch, you probably didn't see it. If you're watching on Twitter, you may or may not have seen it. But if you're watching on YouTube, you've definitely seen that we've been pretty active with the healthcare symposium. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we've been doing interviews. We've been doing some bonus content for that. We've been watching some of the talks going on at the conference. So it's been a busy week. The conference ended literally last Friday, and we've still just continued to, some of these interviews, obviously in a all digital world now, since we're fully remote in a lot of cases. There's it's hard to set up interviews, and especially there's one that had 3 people on it that was difficult to schedule. But it's been good. Lots of cool chats, and you'll see those in your podcast feed if you haven't already soon. We're hoping to get some. We just got to go through a couple levels of clearance first.
Yeah, that's always the fun part.
Yeah.
But man, I'm glad that I know you'll talk a little bit more about it, but I'm glad that it was covered by the podcast, and even at least had a little bit of hands in there as well.
Yeah,
because that was it's one of those things that it's a fun conference. There's it's a nice place from my experience in the past to see a great intersection between industry, in this case healthcare, and human factors people. So it's not just about human factors and all the things we do, kind of like HFES can tend to be. It's much more applied. So that's really cool. So
this is the pre-show, so I don't really care about saying this. We're not on the podcast yet, but boy, we've come a long way from getting yelled at from Micah Inslee for recording something without her permission in a NASA panel, and you getting kicked out of the healthcare symposium for not having your ticket on you. We've come a long way, man.
Yeah, I know. It's it's funny to think about that stuff, right? Because I totally had forgotten that. Yeah, I got booted out of a session from healthcare symposium.
Yeah.
But it's what it is.
Yeah. Not our proudest moments, but look where we're at now.
And it's how we got to here.
We got merch and stuff.
It's we wanted to be able to make the stuff. I mean, I don't know. I remember your goal with all of this was to make human factors just an accessible thing.
Yeah.
And you've definitely done that.
We've done that, man.
It's through silly stuff like that. Getting thrown out of stuff, pushing the boundaries where, because there's not a whole lot of press that covers any of this stuff.
No. So and what's funny too is that I was invited to a brainstorming session for HFES earlier this week. I actually had it on Monday morning. We talked about what types of content HFES can produce that would be useful to people like practitioners, right? We've had this conversation, Blake. What's useful to practitioners? So I was invited to that. I was able to kind of speak freely, so that's nice. So they know what we're doing over here, and they trust us, at least with making human factors accessible.
That's good.
So in this pre-show, I want to tackle a couple things. If you're here, you obviously see the title. We've already checked our Patreon, and so they have chosen the what is it? The lead designer of Ingenuity. Is it the designer or the pilot or chief pilot? Explaining how to fly a helicopter on Mars. This article from IEEE Spectrum. We're going to talk about it on the show tonight. I thought it'd be a good idea. Blake, you've already written the blurb, so we don't have to mess around with that during this pre-show. But I think it'd be a good idea to pull in some of the some human factors relevant concepts that we can just kind of spit off and remind everybody that, oh yes, these are challenges, these are core human factors tenets that we're talking about here. So like I'm talking about things like supervisory control and how that's really impossible with something like this when you have such a delayed reaction for it. And then we're also talking about simulation. We're talking about there was another thing in here that I was like, oh yeah, no, that's a great one to pull in. But let's pull in some of that stuff. So I'm going to look for some resources here. You look for some resources too, Blake, and we'll
absolutely. It's always fun to kind of revisit some of those more core problems that you don't really deal with on the day-to-day. Because it's not since I was in grad school that I've really thought about the impact of supervisory control kind of in the UAS realm, where like latency becomes a very big problem and how that, basically interacts in a system that's meant to work pretty flawlessly.
Was that at JPL?
No. It's so funny when I wish that I had paid more attention about which story was ahead, because a couple of my grad school friends do work at JPL, so it would have been interesting to reach out earlier and see like, hey, do you guys know anything about this? Because it's way beyond the scope of my thinking.
Well, yeah, I mean, like it's impossible to tell which news story that we're going to talk about until the day of, because that's when votes lock in. This one was ahead pretty much all week. But you never know. Somebody could have came in last minute and gone the smart farms route. I don't know if that one's still even up there. I think I reluctantly gave that one up.
Bummer.
I know, it would have been fun. Oh no, smart farms got one vote.
Yes, there we go.
It's still in the running. We're going to say goodbye to COVID-19's effects on New Jersey supply chains.
Oh, cool.
Time to regulate AI that interprets human emotions and our digital humans, the next step in human-computer interaction. We're getting rid of those. But what did make the cut for next week, anyway, is evaluating safety of edge lane roads. Cybersecurity report smart farms are hackable farms. And the smart bandage could hasten healing and might even detect COVID. So we got some still good things. And then we also have whatever I found this week, it was a really great news week, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, did you pull all this stuff in your office hours earlier this week?
Yeah, dude, it was a great week for office hours. There was so much good news. Hang on, some of the fun ones here. There's cobots are acting like puppies to better communicate with humans. There's this Novid tracking app that scans your social circle for COVID-19 risk, and expanding your access to active transportation. So there's some pretty cool news stories in there. There was a lot. I think there was like 13 stories that I pulled. So it's definitely worth checking out. We've posted that on our blog. If you want to go check it out, there's a little advertisement for our bloggy blog.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Man, it is so nuts to me how long ago the definition of supervisory control was like put out by Sheridan. That's hilarious.
Good. You look up supervisory control. I'm going to look up simulation stuff. And we got some stuff from like Peter Hancock here that we can talk about for, he wrote a whole book, or at least was a editor of a whole book on human factors in simulation and training. So,
man, how fun was that, sitting down and talking to not just him, but also his daughter, who is in human factors and teaches at Cal State, my alma mater. That was the best conversation ever.
That interview was wild. That was probably one of my favorite interviews. I was so lost during that whole interview. I was just like, you know what? It's their show. Let them talk.
Yeah.
They can ration this out, and if anyone's listening can follow along, that's great. Otherwise, you I don't know, man. That was definitely one of the coolest.
It was good for a laugh. There's no doubt, because there was like, what did they go off on? They did like a debate on time, like a philosophical discussion on time. I was like, holy cow, this is way out of my
temporal perception. Is a whole thing on like whether time was real.
Yep, that was great.
Wow, how this is bad. I can't even find like applying. Geez, like I can't find some good resources on simulation. Like just key concepts or something.
I'm surprised there's not like, if you throw HFES on there with a Google search with just that search term, you should be able to find something.
Yeah.
You never really know.
Human factors aspects of simulation. There we go. Let's talk about this. Let's see. How are we doing on time? We still got 13 minutes. We're okay.
Yeah, we got plenty of time to throw in some stuff.
Remind me to kill this before we go on, because I was watching some of the YouTube videos and I was like, oh God, I look so bad sitting there drinking energy drinks on the show.
Oh yeah, that's all good. I'll make sure to say something. Let's see here. Let's drop some supervisory control in the notes.
Oh, hey, for anyone watching, I have some fun things to show you all. Hold on. So there's some fun what's the word I'm looking for? Assets I've thrown together in a pinch for some of these YouTube content that we're putting out there. Here, I'll share with you all. But this is this is our new intro video. There's no audio here for you, I think, but just imagine our intro playing here. This is something I've thrown together.
Amazing.
This is the first draft. This is all done in Camtasia. This is the first draft. It's not very exciting. That it's whatever. I got to show you the second draft though. Hang on. What is the second draft? Let me find it. So, second draft I think is much better. And I think it does a much better job of where'd I put it?
Oh, he's lost it. There it goes.
I've lost it. I don't know where it went. Is it in here? Is it intro video 2? Hold on. I know I have it.
Yeah, you shot it to me in like a text this morning.
Yeah.
So it's got to be on our Google Drive somewhere.
Well, yeah. Oh, it's certainly on our. Wait. I think this is that's the other one. Okay, hold on. Intro video version. There it is. Here you go. This is it. I like this one much better.
Yeah, this one came out really cool.
I don't know. I still might for this part, I might just throw a bunch of stock footage behind it. I don't know.
Do it.
It's exciting to me. But all this was free stock footage, and I was like, oh, transportation and defense and coal, and we have aviation. It's all there, right?
All the things that you say every week, you're able to find free stock footage that actually looks really good too.
It does look good. It looks really good. It's 1080p. It's not 100 or 4K. It's not 4K, but whatever.
That won't do. It's not 4K.
It won't do. It's not 4K.
That's hilarious.
I know somebody who would say that.
There was something that came out in 4K the other day. I was like, wow, this looks insane. I don't even know if I want to watch this in 4K. All right. Let's see. So much craziness with supervisory control that I've forgotten. Man.
Good. And I am simulation and aviation. I mean, a lot of this article is simulation. So I I don't feel like I need to particularly, there's a lot there.
Yeah, there
Yeah, I
is,
don't
and
need
there's
to
a
pull
whole
out.
the whole telepresence issue becomes completely different because now we're on Mars.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah,
It's a good
lack
pick.
of
I'm glad the
feedback.
patrons were stoked on that because it blew my mind that was even a thing. And then because of course my mind is thinking a helicopter flying to Mars, but it's all good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then just today, this is like sciencey news. Just today, they released that they were able to create oxygen on Mars, the rover.
What? That's that's too nuts.
So that gives us hope for like human habitation on Mars.
You know, it was nuts. I feel comfortable saying this on the pre-show because it's pre-show. But
pre-show.
I watched a couple of videos on this thing because I wanted to see what the design looked like, and that led me down to like a CNET, which was that photo I showed you earlier about how my day's going.
Yeah.
And so I watched this thing, and I'm sitting there like, are they just like beta testing this thing in somewhere in the Nevada desert? It's like, no,
that's Mars, dude.
That's Mars.
Isn't that nuts? like you look at this footage and you're like,
it blew my mind. I was like, that looks human and habitable. There's just no oxygen anywhere. It's nuts. I don't get it.
It's absolutely nuts. You watch the video and you're like, wow, we're on Mars. And the fact that we can get signals like that from Mars,
like high quality.
Nuts. Yeah, it's super high quality. It's really cool, dude. It's exciting. It's exciting.
It feels like it's a lot for my little brain, to be 100% honest, because it's just like watching something in such crisp definition and realizing that it's robots that are autonomous in some way, like the helicopter anyway, not the rover. But it's just so mind-boggling. It's stuff that here's the thing for me. So it's close to science fiction, and it makes science fiction appear like it's not far out of reach. That's the part that's really getting me when I think about it at night before I go to sleep. But anyway,
yeah, it's super cool, dude. It's a ton of freaking cool stuff, dude. I'm looking at a paper right now. Human factors research as part of a Mars exploration analog mission on Devon Island.
Devon Island,
yeah. This is like a crewed mission to Mars, so it's not really applicable here because we're just talking about controlling something remotely, and simulating it in environments. It's different. You know what I didn't watch is this Ingenuity media reel. That's kind of cool though.
Are you watching the JPL one or the one from Ingenuity itself?
The NASA Mars helicopter Ingenuity media reel.
Gotcha.
It's the one from JPL. It's the one in the article.
Yeah.
So I mean, we can talk about the design process here too. So a couple things that I want to touch on here. I'm gonna write these in the notes. Looks like you got some good notes on supervisory control. So we can talk about supervisory control. We can talk about the simulation aspect, which obviously we can go off of. I don't really need notes for that. And then the last bit is going to be the design process, because they actually talk about, they want to get it as close to the final product because it takes a lot of time and resources that go into it. And so they were saying like, let's get this as close to the final design before we even start testing. So that'll be something we can talk about. And then I feel like each one of these questions, honestly, they asked this chief pilot would be good, right?
Yeah, we could definitely chat through some of those.
Yeah. We'll just have the article up and open, honestly.
Yes, indeed.
So I feel pretty ready to go with this bit today. Oh, you know what we didn't do? We have two of the three already picked out because one of our patrons reached out anonymously with a really good question. And then one of our where's one of our
Discord members?
Yeah, Discord reach out as well. So it'll be it will be a good time. Blake, I put those in there for you to read off your answer if you'd like, because we've already answered these to the people that have asked them. So I don't know if you just want to go over your answer again on the show, but I put it in there anyway.
Oh, this like long-winded novel that I wrote, that particular Patreon. Okay.
Yeah,
I can give like a summation of it. I won't bore everybody with the long answer. That was one of those times where I'm reading something where I'm like, oh my goodness, I have so much here.
But what if people want that novel?
I mean, I can totally read it. That's not a big deal. I reread it like three or four times out loud before I sent it, because I got to make sure that doesn't have a bunch of weird phrasing that I like to do. But yeah, we can go that route. I can just read it out, let them have it.
Let them have it.
Maybe it'll be
I mean,
incentive. Right?
You've put thought and effort into the response, so
true.
You know, why can't I crop this thing? Man, I'm just having a lot of issues tonight, I think. How's your computer doing? What was the issue?
When it turned off, I don't know. I have no idea. Yeah, zero. I mean, so usually if that happens, it only takes like an hour to figure it out. It took days for me to like do as many resets. So basically, when I got it to turn on earlier this week, I just was like, all right, you're staying in sleep mode until the podcast is done, and then I'll shut it down. Yeah, so I don't really know what's going on. I think I just need to get a lot of stuff off the laptop. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
Hang on. Well, you know what? Never mind. It's fine. So I want to go over. We'll start the show here in just a couple minutes, but I want to go over some of these. What do we call them? It came from. Do you want to? You know what? I feel like doing a little tooltip. Do you want to do a tooltip? Do you want to? How do you measure your performance and keep track of your metrics?
Yeah, let's do that.
Short answer: I don't. I write it down.
Not a UX guy myself. There we go. Okay.
Okay, cool. So we'll do that one. If you are hanging out with us, keep hanging out with us. We're going to go away for about 1 minute. We're going to come back and we're going to start the show. Blake, do you have your audio ready?
No.
I was the one to say it this week.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't have it ready to go. All the things that I have up, that's not one. All right, let me just test it.
That's not one of them.
All right, does this record sound? Yes,
Testing
it does.
Here.
And let's play it back. Yep,
great.
Cool. All right, we are good to go on my end.
Great. We're gonna hit record at 10. Cool.
Okay.
All right, for everyone on the stream with us, just hang out for 1 minute while we take a quick break, and we'll be back to start the show right after this. Hey, everybody, what's going on? It is April 22nd, 2021. My name's Nick Roome, and this is Human Factors Cast. I'm joined today by Mr. Blake Arnsdorff over there.
Hey, Nick. How's it going, man? It's another wonderful Thursday.
Hey, Blake, it is a wonderful Thursday. You know what we got going on? for programming notes here. If you haven't already, there is a there's a healthcare symposium coverage that we've been doing over the last week. Man, it feels like we got a lot of stuff coming out. So Elise and I have been at the conference all week. We brought you a recap. It's in your podcast feeds already. We did that last night. There's a couple more interviews to come, so stay tuned for those. There's one already out with Rebecca Butler, who works at MedStar Health. Definitely worth checking out some of the interviews. We're bringing you a lot of different coverage. So like I said, more interviews to come. It's a great time. Go listen to them if you haven't already. But we know why you're here. We're here for the human factors news. Let's get into it. That's right. This is the part of the show all about human factors news. This is where we talk about everything related to the field of human factors. We could be talking about supervisory control. We could be talking about simulation. We could talk about the design process, a little bit of everything. As long as it relates to the field of human factors, it is fair game for us to sit here and talk about. Blake, what do we got up this week?
So this week, Nick, there's helicopters now on Mars. So recently, the Mars helicopter Ingenuity took the skies of Mars for the first time, and it did so fully autonomously. So this Ingenuity helicopter was designed for autonomous flight out of obvious necessity, since the time delay between Ingenuity's pilots at the Jet Propulsion Lab, or JPL, and the Jezero crater on Mars makes manual or even supervisory control absolutely impossible. So the best folks at JPL practiced and did this all through simulation. And then the hope was they would be able to handle the helicopter and everything from testing and simulation here on Earth. And here on Earth, simulations are very critical for things like this. So it's a critical tool for many robotics applications because it helps you not have to rely on using expensive hardware, potentially breaking it, and you can just do stuff in the moment and test and solve problems. And once you think you get everything right in a simulation, you can then go and actually test it out in the real world. But in this case, you're testing a helicopter on Mars, so it's a little bit higher stakes. Testing the Mars helicopter under conditions that match it, and they found were just not even possibly replicable on Earth. And JPL has flown a bunch of different engineering models in Martian atmospheric conditions, and they actually ended up using actuated tethers here to try and mimic some of Mars's gravity, but there was really no way to know how the helicopter would perform outside of simulations until they actually flew it on Mars. So with that in mind, the Ingenuity team has been heavily relying on simulations since it's the only tool they can get to actually give them a perspective of what it's going to be like trying to control this thing or autonomously fly it. So Nick, how in the world has this happened? This is just nuts to me that we've put a helicopter on Mars that could be autonomously flown and provide us footage back here on Earth.
It's nuts, right? Like you and I were talking about this before in the pre-show that it's kind of nuts that yes, we're on Mars again. We've been on Mars. We're on Mars again. And it's so weird to see stuff going on Mars. And now there's a helicopter involved. So yes, I kind of buried the lead there at the top when I said supervisory control, simulation, and design process. We're going to be talking about all those three in relation to the helicopter that is now on Mars. But if you're just asking for my general reaction, yeah, it's freaking nuts, man. This is cool. What do you think about a helicopter on Mars?
So the thing that really blew my mind is like thinking about the fact that we've got a rover up there that's able to take a lot of high quality video of this thing actually functioning on Mars. And when I thought about it and looked at the design, it's such a smart and sleek design in and of itself that it just kind of blew my mind that this thing was even able to fly in such a tough atmosphere, and that the doubly so. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this as we go through kind of the deeper human factors related points. But the fact that you would have to rely on testing something basically only in simulation and you're going to fly it autonomously, that just has such far-reaching implications. Like as a human factors person, as somebody that worked on it, that would be working on one of these teams, I can only imagine the amount of kind of like, well, we've done as much as we can on simulations on Earth, but really we're just gonna have to put it out into the wild on Mars and see how it performs. That's a giant leap of faith in some ways.
Yeah, and I mean they did do things here on Earth to prepare for that. We can talk about those with simulation and the design process. They made sure that they got it right here before they moved it over there, and there's still some guesswork involved. let's start with the supervisory control aspect of this, because this is a unique situation where you can't really have supervisory control of this helicopter, right? I mean, that's how you would do it normally with a drone. Here on Earth, what you would do is you would have a drone, you'd be controlling it, and you'd be able to react in real time to what's going on. And so, you have sort of this reactionary piece that you can't necessarily do from afar. It's a totally different game, because and the reason this is obviously the time difference that it would take to receive that feedback. The drone would already be on the floor. And so, like, I don't know, I thought it'd be kind of cool to go through some of these supervisory control tenets of human factors, if you will, and explain why they are not, able to be applicable here in this situation. Blake, what you got?
So the way to kind of think about this, like Sheridan laid out a long time ago, I think in the late 90s, this is where this paper is from. But anyhow, there was like three main problems that exist just with the implementation of supervisory control on top of adding automation to it that were going to really affect how people are able to maintain any kind of supervisory control. But before we dive too deep, let's do the best scientific job we can to kind of operationally define what we're talking about when we say supervisory control. So that's just a general term for control of many controllers and control loops. So imagine a UAV that needs to be able to be pass control back and forth between multiple different entities or multiple different controllers. So somebody's flying it at one point, they need to hand it off to another controller, or somebody can request control of it. That's the kind of like simplest definition of it. And you can imagine that adds in a lot of different potential issues, losing control of something, or line of sight problems, or even mismatches in an understanding of, did I hand this thing off to another controller? There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Now let's kind of like add automation on top of that. Can you imagine this issues that would be running rampant just from multiple people trying to control one mechanical object? And then if you put automation in the loop, it adds kind of another layer of complexity. So when we think about this in terms of putting something now into space where the latency is going to be so bad or so impossible to really understand, you could see how supervisory control, just from a basic definition, is going to be nearly impossible, if just not even a good thing to even try.
Yeah, I mean, you talked a lot about the different controllers that go into this, the different systems that are controlling something, automation, different humans, different operators. There's also the control loop, right? Which is the process by which I was describing. You see the feedback, or you get feedback in some way from sensors on board. In the UAV example, you would see an altimeter. You would have a rough approximation of what your where in space you are, right? There might be a camera on the drone where you're able to take in information as the pilot, and you're able to react to that information, right? And the biggest thing with this helicopter on Mars is you don't have a control loop. You do, but it's the time delay between when an action is taken and your reaction to that is so great that you would not be able to correct anything that needed to be corrected. And I mean, they do have control loops when it comes to like the rover, right? They can move it, inches at a time if they need to get out of a precarious situation. But in a situation where you have the helicopter, you can't do that because it's flying at such a velocity, or any kind of critical mistake could cost could cost NASA a helicopter. Let's put it that way, right? Because if you think about it, if let's say there is a rock that the rover can't get around, well, that's not that big of a deal, right? It's stuck on the wheel got stuck on a rock. Well, they have to back it up and move it and go forward, and that can be done in a loop where they can understand exactly where the rock is, and there's no consequences because there's no immediate threat. Right, where a helicopter, you have the threat of potentially, if there's there's no gusts of wind on Mars, right? Like that was one of the biggest.
No, yeah, that's true.
So the big thing with that is that it could just fall flat and land incorrectly, and you couldn't
there goes
really,
your blades. You're done.
That's it. I mean, Does the Ingenuity have an arm that they can go over and like try to prop it back up? I don't know. I'd imagine, but so that control loop just in general is completely gone. You don't have that with that's something that you have in typical supervisory control. You want to talk about these three aspects here of supervisory control as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So these are like this is one of the areas that I think is really interesting from past work on supervisory control. So the big thing that you've kind of talked about, if we don't have the control loop, and even if we did, we're going to just experience this massive loss of a person's mental model of making an interaction through a piece of software, trying to control something that's, millions of miles away. And the fact that one-for-one interaction is not there. So you're just going to lose somebody's ability to understand or be able to kind of even do mental calculations on behalf of the machine of like what they could do in terms of interaction. So you lose out on somebody's mental model and kind of being able to align with it. But I think the biggest kind of thing to talk about here is this is an instance where you have to, like, as a human factors professional, and definitely in grad school, I heard a lot more about kind of levels of automation and figuring out as you scale automation, what that means for an operator in the loop. And something in this case is that this is that top tier of fully automated systems, because there's just no way that a human operator, because of the parameters of what we're doing, the distance, the lack of communication and all that kind of stuff, without like full autonomous control and simulations of that autonomous control, you would not be able to kind of accomplish the things you need to, or that you're hoping you can do with this helicopter, or putting anything else on Mars for that matter. So this is one of those instances where just like the cost benefit analysis in this case, like from the human factors perspective, leans much more heavily in terms of automation, leading you to need to do these kind of simulated tests.
Yeah, those are great points. I think that's right. There's the automation that's going to have to do the heavy lifting here. Humans don't really have that much control in this situation. I think, I don't know. It's hard for me at least, to apply these principles to this situation because they're just absent, right? I mean, You talk about a traditional control loop where you get that feedback back, and you do get all these principles, right, of supervisory control. You get all of them. And so, but with this rover, or with the helicopter, at least, you don't. Anything else to add for supervisory control? Because I do want to get into the simulation bit, because this is where a lot of the magic kind of happened with this.
I think let's move to the simulation, because I mean, this is how this whole endeavor was even possible, was being able to both simulate things in real life here through the design, through different models that JPL had put together. So where would you like to kick off with simulation for this particular one?
Well, let's just talk about simulation in general. Simulation in general is a way for you to estimate something without serious cost to the actual thing, right? So think about like flight simulators. This is where pilots fly planes in a simulated environment, so that way if there's any critical errors, they're done in a simulated environment. They get that practice for the real thing, where hopefully they won't commit those errors, or if anything goes wrong, they'll be able to react appropriately. So the advantage of being in a simulator is something where you can certainly react to things that are uncommon, and that way you have that built up muscle memory for those things that are uncommon, and you can react appropriately when it actually does happen in the real world. There are just a side note really quick, there's a whole simulation track that they came out with in the healthcare symposium this year. I attended some of those talks. It was very interesting. So if anyone went to that conference, go check out some of those simulation chats. They were very cool, breaking down why it's so important to have at least that simulation aspect in a hospital. You can imagine, but it's there. So let's talk about the simulation environments for this helicopter and what they did. So they actually developed this over at JPL. They looked at a system basically that they've been using for a number of missions. I think they said 30 years. So it's been around for a while, but they took that framework and kind of built their own helicopter simulation based on that framework. And they use their own rotor models. So this is kind of getting into the technical bits of it. So this is more or less how the helicopter will react in that environment based on this model, right? So there's they have the aerodynamic models that feed into this simulation. And a lot of this at this point sounds like technical babble, right? This is all different models that fit into the simulation. If you think about it like if you think about a flight simulator, there's these air simulation models that will make the plane react in different ways, right? So the more accurate you can get to how air actually impacts the vehicle, the plane in that instance, the closer you can get to what it's going to be like in the real environment. And so they try to model that with these frameworks. And then, so, the whole question of whether this is valid and the validation bit of this simulation, what does that look like? Any thoughts so far, Blake, before we get into the validation bit?
I mean, although this is a lot more of technical sides of things, it really is interesting because it informs the entire design. I mean, without this kind of this formal testing and giving you, and it also kind of pulls on JPL's past knowledge of already having stuff that's deployed on Mars, gathering information in terms of weather and how the atmosphere interacts. And so being able to actually simulate it before you start building or even start trying to build, simulated models that act like Mars's atmosphere and what the helicopter might experience. I mean, it cuts down on cost, and from just like a human factors engineering perspective, the capability before you even get to building anything, have an idea of what design's going to work best based off of just early simulation and modeling that's already existing through JPL's kind of either models and designs they've done in the past. So it's kind of just an awesome feat of engineering in general. But what really did they do in terms of when was enough in the simulations in terms of validation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So you were talking about the design process, and we'll actually get to that process in a minute. And it's very interesting how this simulation and that design process kind of intermingle. And so what they basically, I mean, to them, it was like close enough. For them, it was, what did we understand enough about this problem space to where we can actually test this? Then what they did was, once they had enough information for them, they actually went on to test the simulation, the virtual simulation, in a physical space. They did it in a vacuum chamber. So they were flying this helicopter in a vacuum chamber, and they were replicating sort of the Mars atmospheric conditions within that chamber. And so, these tests were, done before they actually tried to fly the helicopter. They were looking at sort of the system identification, which is looking at the properties and dynamics, and how the thing in the physical environment actually reacted to the environment versus how the thing in the virtual environment reacted, or with the models reacted to the environment, and what was the delta between the two. How is the physical environment different from the simulated environment, and how, can we use that information from the physical environment to update our models and produce a better simulation? So they did this in several stages. They're doing things that they can't necessarily fully replicate until you do this in the real environment. And so it was a lot of going back and forth. And one of the biggest challenges for them was kind of this, the Martian gravity. You can't, they can simulate a lot of the same stuff here on Earth.
Yeah.
Environmental conditions. They can, everything will work exactly as it does, except for gravity. Gravity is different. And so, the way they try to get away with this is attaching a little string to the top of the helicopter and pulling up on it, so that way it reacted a little bit, lighter to Earth's gravity than, to kind of simulate the Mars gravity. So it's not perfect.
Best you can, right? But
it's not perfect, but that's how they did it, right? And so that's kind of where they were coming from with this validation process. And they were talking about what you can do to compensate for the physical testing that you can't do on Earth. That's kind of the string on top of the helicopter that I was telling you about that pull up to simulate Mars gravity, which I thought was a kind of a clever old-fashioned solution, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Just tie a string to it; it'll be fine.
Yeah, and then so the question came up, right? Whether or not this was, are they relying on simulation too much? But it's their only option. So it's
what else can you really do at that point?
Yeah, you have to keep testing. So I don't know. Do you have anything else to add on simulation? There's a couple more bits in here about when did how far did you push the simulation and what they learned from it. So we can get into those. But did you have any thoughts at this point, Blake, on the simulation aspect of things?
I guess what I found interesting that I wouldn't have thought of, because when you say helicopter, I really just think about like, okay, it's got to lift off the ground. There's going to be a lot of kind of constraints that we, like you said, we can't necessarily simulate to a T, but we can add crazy strings to it, or we can like push it into, these chambers that should be able to at least give us something close to what we're modeling in our simulation program side. But then there's the other aspects of this thing, because it's not just meant to be a helicopter. It's got to be a sensor. It's got to have sensors on it and have cameras going as well. So like trying to test that stuff to a point where you feel like you've tested it and pushed it as far as you can, and then feeling confident that like, okay, we've developed sensors and camera equipment that we think will be able to survive, this kind of harsh environment that we can't do anything else to simulate it in terms of doing it on Earth or doing it in models through programming. It must have been really interesting to kind of have to figure out like, okay, sensor wise, what do we need and what's the maximum we can really push it to so that it can do something different than what the rover's doing in terms of what it's gathering. So the like limitations of simulation here, I mean, at some point you do just get to this place of it's as good as we can get it. Now we really have to make that jump and actually push it out to test it on Mars itself.
Yeah, we can just throw another helicopter on Mars if it doesn't work. And that kind of goes into the design. That kind of goes into the design process. So why don't we jump into that a little bit? Because this is very different from like a design process that you might have here for designing a product on Earth. Because in that iterative design process, you would have a build, test, update, repeat, right? That you'd have that kind of framework where you would test something, you'd go out to the backyard, test the helicopter, but they can't do that here. And so basically the engineers were saying they had to get as close to the final product as they could in that first iteration before they built it, because obviously the first iteration is not what's sitting out there on Mars now, but they got close enough to where they could test a prototype and understand the wind dynamics or the aerodynamics, I guess, of Mars. And then they updated their design based on that. I'm not sure exactly how many designs they went through before they ultimately sent the final prototype out, or the final thing out, right? It's not no longer a prototype. But yeah, I just found the design process and the limitations on the design process very interesting for designing for something on Mars, right? That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm so used to just thinking about the software side, because that's really where I think I've spent my most time. I really don't think I've had too much impact on hardware itself, but I could imagine it being it would feel hamstringing, because even on other things you developed maybe through JPL in the past, you could go to creating actual physical models or rely on stuff that you've already created before, maybe sent to other planets potentially. But even then, I wonder if the iteration was a lot to do with, or had a lot of benefits because they were doing so much virtual simulation. So if you're able to do things in that regard and kind of like take models that exist of, other types of aircraft, whether it's helicopters or whatever they started with, and really test them in virtual environments, if the kind of like design really fleshed itself out there digitally before they even moved to worrying about the first initial build of this thing. But at the end of the day, like you're saying, you would have to build it and then test the physical aspects of it, because there's only so much at this point that a virtual simulation is even going to tell you until you get that first iteration of materials for that first hardware product.
Yeah, so it would be kind of irresponsible of us to not talk about the control aspect of this thing. How does this thing actually get controlled? And the way I understand it, or the way that this this chief pilot of Ingenuity is talking about it, is that they have to pre-program flight paths into the helicopter, so it will kind of do it based on the operator's sort of flight path that they send to the helicopter. And they're starting small, right? I mean, we've flown a helicopter on Mars, but what that flight consists of is a 3-meter rise and a 3-meter descent. And so, that's really what we've done at this point. But to take off and land and test to make sure that the aerodynamics do, in fact, check out, where that's not going to be critical if it falls down, because it'll just land and you can try it again. Hopefully you'll have another shot if you just go up and down without, eventually they would like to take this thing out and survey, like you said, Blake, with the cameras and sensors and everything. And that's going to be a very different flight than up and down. So, talking about the controls and how that interacts with the design process, there's a bunch of different parameters by which you have to control. It's not as simple as like just using a joystick. No, you have to specifically program in exactly what you hope the helicopter will do, right? So, for example, one thing that wasn't included in some of the initial designs was the cyclic control on the upper rotor. They didn't have that, and they found out that they needed that based on some of the simulation and models and prototyping. They found out that that's a control that they actually needed to have control over, because it's pretty important for the disturbances that they thought they might see on Mars from the aerodynamics perspective. So they needed to have that extra control authority over the upper rotor as well. So so that was done mostly in simulation, but they kind of see, they saw that in the prototype. The prototype only had the bottom control, and so they realized they needed it. And it's kind of cool to see exactly that relationship, right? They test these things and realize, oh, we need a control for this thing because it didn't exist, and that is something that could really impact the flight path or the flight dynamics of this helicopter.
That's very true. And when they try and even move forward with this thing, I feel like, because the vertical liftoff and landing, that makes total sense as a starting point, but I know that the terrain can be kind of very different, right, on Mars than anything you would be able to even simulate realistically, because that was a constraint they mentioned about the simulations in general, especially in how it impacts sensors on top of just the rotary components. So going from here, I mean, basically even though they've done a lot of simulation and testing, I can imagine that first kind of mapping out a set of waypoints for where they're going to try and fly this thing and do its first survey. That's really going to probably yield a lot of different information, potentially about how changes to the design will be made, or to help kind of inform the next kind of iterations of this thing. Because although Ingenuity is definitely the first of its kind, like they even do mention throughout this that there's already some in the works for larger helicopters that can do a little bit more, carry more sensors, or even can break down into various components outside of just being a singular unit. So it's just mind blowing the stuff they're able to like come up with, and the fact that we're able to, although you're not directly under any kind of supervisory control, through autonomous programming, we're able to collect and transmit, along with fly things on a different planet and be able to relay that kind of stuff back to continue feeding different models and stuff like that for the atmosphere, for collections, whatever it may be.
Yeah, you did mention kind of the future here, right? We could talk about the next step. So what they're doing now is these flights on Mars will actually send them pilots and engineers data back, which they can then feed back into their models with real Mars world data that will then help improve some of the simulations that they can run here on Earth. And with that more data, they can understand basically how their flight paths might be impacted by real Mars world data. And so it all feeds back into itself, right? The more flights this thing gets on Mars, the more data they have to feed into their models that they can use to fly this thing better on Mars. It's all kind of cool how it all feeds in together, and I love it.
There's your actual feedback loop right there.
Yeah, exactly. Except for it's very delayed, and Anyway, anything else to add to this wonderful news story about flying a helicopter on Mars?
I'm just blown away by it. I really loved seeing some actual footage of this thing flying on Mars, because that just was so much. It brought this home so much further, because they do. If you haven't checked out the article that we posted on both the blog, in the description of the podcast, everything like that, it's worth checking out, because they do a breakdown of the design and development of this thing, as well as you get to see a few shots of this thing flying on Mars, which is just so phenomenal.
Yeah, I was speechless when I saw it. It was just absolutely so cool to see. All right. Well, thank you to our patrons this week for selecting this topic, and thank you to our friends over at IEEE Spectrum for our news story this week. If you do want to follow along, we do post links to the original articles in our Slack as we find them, and we also post them on a little news roundup every week. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to see what's going on in the human factors community right after this.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our weekly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and Human Factors Minute, a Patreon-only weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.
Yes, huge thank you, as always, to our patrons, especially our honorary Human Factors Cast staff, Michelle, Tripp. Patrons like you keep the show running. Thank you all so much for your continued support. Hey, Blake, speaking of patrons, fun fact. If we get 2 more patrons at the Human Factors Engineer level, that would allow us to upgrade Restream. And what that means is that we can now stream on Facebook. We can do some other interesting things that the free version doesn't allow us to do, like upload some of those interviews that we did on more platforms, so more people can see them, more people can enjoy that content. It also allows us to do some more fun things with the graphics, like, you know, we can put that Patreon commercial without me having to screen share in Restream right now. You know, it'll just be built in, and it'll be something that I don't even have to think about or manage while we're doing these live streams. Also, we could do an intro, which would be cool too. And that's just 2 more patrons at the Human Factors Engineer level. So if you're able to, we do give back for that. You know, that's Human Factors Minute right there. That's in your pocket if you help support us at that level. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and switch gears and get to this next part of the show? Yes, that's right. It came from. This week, we're talking Patreon. We're talking Discord. This is the part of the show where we search all over the internet to bring you topics the community is talking about. And today, we're going to feature 2 that came from our very own Human Factors communities, one from Patreon and one from Discord. If you'd like to join us, please, ask your questions in Slack and Discord, or if you're a patron, ask us there too. This first one here is from a patron, but they asked to remain anonymous. So I'm gonna read this without any identifying details, and it'll become obvious as to why we're not going to mention names here. And Blake, I know you have some thoughts on this one, so let's go ahead and read this one. So I have a question. Please don't use my name. It's about one of my professors. Don't want them thinking I'm talking about them. It's about the Think-Aloud protocol. So basically, one of my professors does not like the fact that does not like the Think-Aloud protocol. They think it's more of a hatred towards Think-Aloud protocol. You can hear the irritation in their voice when they talk about it. But this person's been reading, listening to audiobooks, human factors engineers, and a few of them actually recommend using the Think-Aloud protocol while conducting usability studies or usability tests. So which is it? My professor says the Think-Aloud protocol is ridiculous because it violates Chris Wicken's multiple resource theory. I can see why he thinks that, but if all those books I've been reading say otherwise, what do you both think? When you conduct a usability test, do you use the Think-Aloud protocol? Or maybe it's Talking Aloud versus Think Aloud. I'm pretty sure it's one of those. Blake, this is a fantastic question. You wrote an essay back to this patron, and I want to get your thoughts on this.
All right. So I am going to break down some of the stuff that I wrote because it did strike me odd that you're having this kind of interaction with an educator. So I want to kind of tackle it from my perspective and be a little bit fair about it. So my response here. So to be fair, from a purely academic perspective, your professor, absolutely correct. So taking into account the impact of talking in a way that's unnatural while doing any kind of task, complex or not, will require somebody to reallocate mental resources. That makes sense. That's very in line with Chris Wicken's thoughts and feelings there. So however, this feels like a very biased perspective to have as an HF professional, but doubly so as an educator, since as Nick does point out at some point, this method's use is useful in an it depends situation. And I also feel this is very academic to feel like this is a problem, you shouldn't use it, where I've come from more of an applied background. So there's kind of a difference in just thought here. So I use and encourage my students through Design Lab to try out Think-Aloud protocols and cognitive walkthroughs in their usability tests. But there's specific reasoning for why I suggest this method. So in early stages of product development, when you only have an unvalidated persona and maybe some limited user or market engagement, using Think-Aloud protocol can be super informative. So encouraging people to express themselves and verbalize their self-talk can give you insight into your design, the workflow you're creating, but more importantly, it's going to show you how your end users actually think, and not just about a product, but a problem that they're experiencing that your product or service is supposed to be solving. So another use case here is that I in earnest would be really interested to hear what somebody's professor would have to say in this case. But when you're working with an SME, for instance, from my experience, this application of Think-Aloud protocol here can be even more invaluable because you're working with somebody that's in a brand new domain potentially that you know not very little about, and you're working with an expert within it. And in the case of most SMEs, they can't really tell you the what or the why that's so directly associated with a task or a process they're used to doing. However, if you're putting them in front of a new product that has to do with a specific workflow, software, let's say, they'll likely bring in their past experience that they have as an SME. So you'll get a better insight into kind of what's going on in the background, how they think about their problems, what user needs actually might be there that haven't been identified. Now, let's talk about a suboptimal situation where you wouldn't maybe want to use Think-Aloud protocol that's much more in line with what your professor is saying. So in this case, it's really, to me, when you're focused and your main driving force is metrics. So if, for instance, there's an interaction within a team or with a piece of software where if that interaction is not done timely or gotten right, you can have severe consequences. Yes, you don't want to be testing for that or introducing any kind of erroneous stuff into your usability testing because it'll give you inaccurate data. Another example is an A/B test, right? So you'll want to have multiple points of comparison, both qualitative and quantitative. And at this point, you may want clean time on task or any kind of other important performance metric. And you'll want to avoid introducing, again, any of that unnatural behavior so that you don't get an unclear picture. However, this is kind of my absolute personal take on how I apply HF methods. So it's kind of up to you how you do it in your own work. In a situation where I cannot use Think-Aloud protocols, I will often, and I have to observe from a distance, I'm going to often use kind of observation techniques like looking at people's body language. Are they making a face? Are they changing or sighing does their voice change? And I'll use this during usability tests to kind of give me some stuff to talk about in a post-test interview. So still some of the similar concepts from Think-Aloud protocol, really trying to analyze what may be going on during a scenario, but using that afterwards. But anyway, so that was a long-winded answer. Basically, I think it really just depends on what you need it for. And are you in a situation where metrics are more important than understanding an operator? But Nick, give us your perspective on Think-Aloud protocol. Is it even useful?
Yes, it totally is useful. My answer was nowhere near as long as yours.
Yeah.
So
No.
I'm basically, in short, yes, it depends, right? I think the Think-Aloud protocol is a really incredibly useful tool when you're trying to get the insight of a user in a certain scenario. I think where it does break down and where it does violate this multiple resource theory is when you are looking at where cognitive load is critical, is mission critical, and measuring that load is what you want to do, right? Because then if you're having them do an additional task of think aloud as you're doing it, it impedes that that other task that they're doing. So if my kind of rule of thumb is if it's not like a life and death kind of situation, then and if they can afford to do it cognitively, then the benefit of gaining that insight from the users is completely worth it. I think that it outweighs the performance hit that they get from actually having to think aloud as they're doing something. So that's, again, just my experience as well. But I mean, I think there is value to each of them. And it sounds like a total cop-out answer, but it really does just depend on what you're trying to measure and whether or not it's appropriate for the situation. And I totally agree with your assessment, Blake, that it is inappropriate of a professor to knock on a technique when it does serve purpose in some circumstances and not in others. So that's my not so long-winded answer of this question.
Gotcha.
All right. We have another one. This one's from our Discord community. This is advice on how to land internship. Advice on how to land internships. This is from Shaq S, presumably Shaquille O'Neal. Hey, I'm not sure if this is the right place to post this. Yes, it absolutely is. If you have questions, post them in there. But I was wondering if anyone had any tips or advice on how to land an internship in human factors. I'm a first-year grad student and in an online Masters of Human Factors curriculum, and it's been quite difficult to find and or be able to land anything because of my lack of experience in the field. So I think this is a great question. Blake, what do you think? How do you land an internship?
Honestly, I found this really, really hard to come up with anything that I felt was super meaningful. I do have some ideas, but it was one of these things where I haven't thought about the fact that if you're in an online program, how much of a different landscape that puts you in. Because for when I went to grad school, I picked a program based off of research they were doing and the fact that there was internships embedded in it because it was an in-person program and yada, yada. So for this one, I had to really kind of scratch my head. What would you even do in this situation? The things that I threw out to Shaq in our Discord was considering reaching out to the professors you have in your program to see if they know of any opportunities either in the field or if there's a way for you to remotely get involved in whatever research they're doing. Because if it's in your program, there's probably a high probability that you could be able to do something helpful for them, whether it's going through transcripts or doing lit reviews. And so although that's not maybe direct paid experience, that still is experience nonetheless, working for somebody in a reference you'll have. Also, a big plus for me when I was in grad school was being a part of the student HFES, Human Factors and Ergonomics Association, or a society, excuse me. Because that just led to other internship opportunities being introduced to people in different fields outside of aviation, which was my focus in grad school, and led to a lot more opportunities just to network with people, hold volunteer positions, just more resume builders. So the other, I guess, flip side to that is there are probably local communities to you, regardless of where the actual campus are or the campus is located for your master's program or for your program in human factors. So checking out that kind of stuff will help you as well, kind of just build that network so you can find new opportunities.
Yeah, for me, my experience, I got really lucky with my internship. It was very remote, and it was not very competitive. Really, the only people I was competing with were the people in my cohort, and they all fortunately got internships elsewhere. And so, I was kind of there was no competition when everyone left to go back home and do their internships, and I just stayed there and did that there, right? And so I got very lucky with that. I know a lot of people have success beyond the approach of just applying everywhere and see where you get in, right? That's brute force it. Regardless of location. If you're desperate for work, you could do that, certainly. But I know a lot of people have success by attending things like conferences and making connections there. HFES has a whole career center that they source internships from every year. I know it's been a little bit weird with the virtual format and everything. I think they still do it. So it depends on your timeline. If you're still looking later this year, then that might be an opportunity. And they usually know that that's where they get a lot of their students. It's in October, and so they'll probably hire for the following summer. But that's one strategy. There are other conferences that do this as well. But if you're looking for specifically human factors, that's probably one of your better bets. The whole job market right now is just completely messed up because of COVID, right? We're kind of at that tail end of working from home. And there's this remote work being largely accepted. So that brute force approach might actually work out in your favor if maybe you apply all over. There might be some lenient rules right now if you were to apply, is what I'm saying there. Then there's also another resource, which I know not many people actually take advantage of, is the Career Center on campus at the university. Or, they have online versions for this as well. But they can hook it up sometimes. Sometimes they just got a perfect fit for you. And it's because no one else is going to that resource, but it's a resource that you pay for as a student. It is a resource that is available to you. And what the hell? Try it out anyway. See if it works. That's kind of my 2 cents on this.
That's a really good point, Nick. Using different resources that you're already paying for is just a brilliant way to go. Well, one thing I would tack on that I didn't throw in the message, and I will do after the show, is sometimes in this instance, when you feel like you can't get an opportunity, it's time to take a step back and see if you can make an opportunity for yourself. So there's things out there that you could do and write about or produce something from on your own. That could be like your own personal project, something that you can show tangible evidence of, you can tell a story about, you can make social media content out of, to help build that credibility for yourself. Because we live in such a digital time that the more that when you're kind of met with these closed doors or ways you can't figure out the way in, kind of creating openings for yourself can be really, really helpful, and take you places you're not really expecting to go.
Yeah, agree. All right, we got one more up here today. This one is interesting. It says, how do you guys measure your performance or keep track of your metrics? This one's from Reddit. This one's from the user experience subreddit from Agleimielga.
Yes.
Okay, great. Not a UX guy myself, but some context. I'm a technical manager for professional services unit in my current role, and my company started expanding its UX team lead, and I have some great working relationship, looking for at least doubling the size from 4 to 8 by Q2 of this year, mostly targeting junior and senior hires. Given the nature of work that my unit is involved in, we are expecting to have more collaborations with those folks down the road, so I've been invited to join mid-interview rounds to help vet candidates and such. I obviously don't understand enough of this field qualitatively to judge the work, but I can infer some insights from the, quote, numbers they talk about in the outline of job responsibilities. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything or coming up with wild assumptions that are totally off track. So it got me thinking, do people in UX have more or less standardized ways of reporting their performance or some sort of commonly used metrics like OTE in sales or customer satisfaction rating in support? How should someone like me understand and judge those? Are there some example CVs or resources that I can look at? Many thanks, and love the work you do, by the way. All right, Blake, there's a couple different facets of how we can tackle this. I want to say, one, are there any standardized things that UX or human factors professionals use? What can we report for ROI? And then two, what tools do you use to manage your time? Let's do that.
Got it. Yeah. So the ROI thing is very interesting. I've got two perspectives on it. So one was KPIs that were measured on my performance. So just key performance indicators from my previous startup that I worked at. It was basic it was very basic stuff, man. Like things that I didn't particularly agree with, but it was like time spent on projects and delivery rate of expected timelines being, within, or it's one of those things that if you have a timeline and it's attached to a KPI, people want to see it earlier. So things like timeline, products delivered, and then the acceptability of design into acceptability and translation of design and development time. That was a big one. And then overall time spent in meetings. That was another one that was captured. But in terms of managing my own time or using metrics to kind of see how I'm doing, that's one thing that I've really gotten big into in the past 2 years, which is every Monday I come in at 7 and I give myself 45 minutes to plan for the entire week. So doing stuff like blocking off my calendar for development tasks, design tasks, pre-planning meetings that I know I need to have, and giving them limited amounts of times with hard stops for myself. That's kind of what the metrics that I've used for my own benefit, like seeing, okay, if I'm able to plan early on in the week, give myself, determined amounts of time to complete development and design tasks, am I meeting those markers from like a binary yes or no perspective? And then are meetings that I'm having productive? Now, when we say productive, are they not going overtime and we're actually getting action items out of them that can be completed within the timeline we have for a larger portion of a project? So a lot of my stuff is much more me-based. It's not so much team-based, just because I'm the one managing my own time across a lot of projects and I have a lot of responsibilities. But I'm interested to hear from your perspective on both of these, Nick. So from a like time management perspective and from how you think about the ROI of your work, what does that really look like for you?
Yeah, so these are both really good and really challenging questions, I think. So the thing for me is that at a glance, no, I don't keep track necessarily of anything that I do to where I would be able to report that internally, right? That's not something that is required of me here. People understand my importance and the importance of the role, really, and kind of what I do. And I think that understanding is helpful for me not having to track those things. They can see when a deliverable comes through, it's obviously had a lot of love and care has gone into it. So, but I don't want to answer this just like with KPIs and just with like time on task or anything that you've done, time on project or time in meetings, the things that you were talking about, Blake. I think those are fairly standard across companies, I would imagine, at least in some aspects, or at least the micromanaging companies.
Yeah.
I will say there are some things that you can do. I'm thinking from like the agile perspective. If you have an agile framework that you're working in, and not every team does, and not every job role has this, so this only applies really to that. But there are, something along these lines might help you think about it that way. So there are different things by which you can have input to. So you can have input to things like requirements. You could have inputs to design. You could have inputs to various user stories or anything like that. And the more you have input to, you could track, but that's something you actively have to do. You have to say, look, I had input to this user story, that user story, another user story. And you can say things like, this month I provided input to 4 user stories and 10 requirements and 5 designs, right? Like you can say those things month over month, and I've contributed a little bit more to the user stories this next month. That's one way to track it. I don't think it's a particularly helpful thing to do, just because of the nature of the role that you're in. I don't know of any standardized metrics that UX people have, UX or human factors. I know there have been efforts from people I know even to track the number of designs they've created, the number of mock-ups and wireframes and deliverables and all that stuff. And those are important numbers, but really at the end of the day, does it matter if tracking those numbers takes away from designing a better system for the user? That's kind of where I'm at with that. In terms of tracking my own time, I have a running list. It's just a piece of paper that I write down and cross off. I'm not as fancy as Blake. I don't sit down every Monday. I just have a piece of paper next to me at my desk that every time a task comes up, I write it down. And then when I finish it, I cross it off. And every once in a while, when it gets a little busy on the page, I'll just rewrite out my list and organize it appropriately. But that's really how I keep track of my own time. I just kind of work on whatever's on the list, and sometimes I write priorities next to them and circle them if they're really important, like a priority 1, and cross it off when I'm done. I did, for the longest time, I kept a little notebook where I would write out the list, and then once I got to the end of the page, I would, once I've hit the end of the lines on the page, I would write them all over on the next page and cross off everything from the previous page. So that way, any work gets carried over to the next page, and it's just a way that I can go back and flip through some of these tasks and see exactly what I've done. I should get back to that because right now it's just a piece of paper. But again, like, my role has changed a little bit to where I don't have a million small tasks on my plate. I have 5 really big tasks on my plate, at any given time. So that's kind of the way I think about it. I know it's kind of a long-winded answer for a fairly easy thing. Anything else to add to metrics, Blake?
I just want to say, I think you bring up a good point about, like, if you're trying to think about it from a design or a UX perspective, like the number of mock-ups or number of designs delivered, that kind of stuff, like that's great, but that could be good or it could be bad because there is really no standardized meaning for those things. Like, just because you went through a bunch of iterations doesn't mean the design's any better than a team that went through less iterations but maybe thought more about it. So I think it's really hard to even come up with good UX metrics, if you will, and potentially for human factors metrics is at the same time. So I'd be interested to hear if anybody's listening and has kind of like metrics of performance they have to hit at their job, whether it's human factors, UX, whatever. It'd be cool to hear back from the community kind of what they're dealing with now at work, just to even inform how I track my own time or how I talk about my own work.
Good point. All right, let's get into one more thing. This is where we have a chance to just talk about one more thing. Blake, what do you got?
Oh, man. I always forget we're going to get to this part of the show. It always trips me out at the beginning of the show when we start with the news. I get really confused.
Well, you could talk about that for your one more thing.
Yeah, no kidding. One thing that did come up today that I'm really excited about. I talked about this, I think, in the pre-show. Yeah, because we haven't done the banter portion. But it's been a fun week because this is one of those like cycles in my schedule for Design Lab. The platform that I teach UX bootcamp stuff through, that I've gotten new students, and it's always refreshing, especially like just getting somebody fresh and new who's like coming to design or coming to research from a completely different background, and just being excited and being able to connect with other people and looking forward to being able to see them grow over time. Like, one thing that somebody asked me today is like, how do you even get inspired? And it came up that a major part of my design process, and to some degree my development process, is listening to music. And it wasn't really about being able to do anything other than unplug my mind from what I deal with day to day, whether it's meetings or like incoming notifications for emails or notifications on my phone, and how it was just a fun time to be able to connect with somebody else on the impact that music can have in your day-to-day life and your day-to-day work. So that's kind of my one more thing for this week. It's just the impact that has.
So I have one more thing for me. It's have you ever had a situation where you are just busy, completely have every second of your day kind of planned out, and then all of a sudden everything just stops? Like you've turned everything in, there's nothing else to work on, and it's stopped. Have you ever had that?
Oh yeah, a bunch of times.
It feels weird, man. Like, I just had that happen to me this week, and it felt really weird because we were doing all the coverage of the healthcare symposium. We were going, and I think it was yesterday, I had finished all the stuff that I could up until that point. And I like got, and even work too. I got up and I was just like, what am I doing? I have time for myself. This is weird. And I just thought about how strange that feeling was. And that was my one more thing.
So real quick,
right.
we did get a question from Vessel_J on Twitch. So as a programmer, do you lose yourself while coding? And the answer is yes, because I get lost in my own logic. And I also get lost when I get really excited about something new that I'm putting into a prototype or a design. It's one of my, I think it's the reason that I actually like to code is there's some kind of creative quality to it that is combined with the fact that it's really hard to do. So I get lost all the time when I'm coding, whether it's for a good reason or for a bad reason.
Yeah, I don't code often, but when I do, I have the same experience. I think, a lot of it is just a matter of trying to keep track of everything that I've done before and where I'm at and where I'm going. And I need to be able to complete my thoughts before I move on to something else or before I stop for the day. Otherwise, when I come back to it, it's just not gonna happen.
Yeah. All
right.
Stupid anecdote about that. So the times that I do that, it usually means that I have a sticky note on my desk that tells me the line of code to go back to, and it's just like it's not the same. I can't get as immersed in the problem anymore. But anyway.
All right, that's going to be it for today, everyone. Let us know what you guys think of the news story this week. You can hang out with us on our Slack or Discord or get to us on any of our social channels. If you want, you can visit our official website and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date with all the latest human factors news. If you like what you hear, you want to support the show, there's a couple things you can do. One, consider supporting us on Patreon. We have 2 more to get to that human factors engineer level. We can greatly expand our visual and reach, our visual presence and reach. 2, leave us a 5-star review on your podcast medium of choice. And if they don't have it, leave it on our website. 3, tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is really helpful for us because that's how others find out about the show. As always, links to all of our socials and our website is in the description of this episode. I want to thank Mr. Blake Arnsdorff for hanging out with me. Where can our listeners go and find you if they want to talk about helicopters on Mars?
Oh, if you guys want to talk about helicopters on Mars, please reach out to me through social media anywhere at Don't Panic UX.
As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me streaming on Twitch Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific for office hours and across social media at Nick_Roome. Thanks again for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time,
it depends.
All right, if you're watching on stream, stick around with us. We're going to do a post show here. Thank you for that question, Vessel J. I almost missed it. Blake stepped in at the last moment there to get it.
Absolutely. And Vessel J, if you're interested, I do hold office hours like Nick on Sundays, and I do a little bit of programming. So right now I'm working in Next.js, basically teaching myself that framework on top of React as a library. So if you're interested, come hang out on Sundays for sure. But if you're still hanging out, do you program? Do you do any design work? All right, Mr. Nick, I'm going to export this thing and send it over to you.
Send it over to me. I thought that was a great show. I think, we had a lot to talk about with the Mars stuff, and sorry, my brain's fried. Yeah, the one more thing at the end is really weird, right? Like,
well, it throws me off every time when we start and we go to the news. I'm like, oh no, did I miss part? Did I blank for part of the show and I just wasn't here? But yeah, so one more thing. Here we are.
Sure. It's an adjustment for sure.
It's good.
So typically what we do here in the post show is Blake and I will just kind of hang out, and we usually make some podcast art. But you know what? I got a little bit ahead of myself.
Oh, did you already do it?
I did.
Oh my goodness.
Hang on, I'll show you.
Oh my goodness, he's already made the art.
Hang on, here we go. There's the art.
Hey!
Challenges of flying a helicopter on Mars. There's one. And then here's the other one. Perfect. It's the hero image. I love the hero image. I think it's just so great. Man, look at those carbon fibers.
Yeah, yeah, they look so cool in the physical space where they tested at JPL. There's one shot of it spinning up in one of those promo videos, and it just looks so sick.
Yeah,
beautiful,
really great. Yeah. So that's that. I mean, we've that's the post show. No, I'm just kidding. We'll hang out and take questions if you're still watching, hanging out. I think the volume on that Patreon commercial was really low, but I think that's an artifact of sharing the screen through Restream. I don't.
Yeah. So, although it's for me, it sounded pretty great in my headphones, like just enough. But I don't know. We'll have to leave it up to anybody that maybe heard it.
I turned it up like max, but I think we get those 2 extra Patreons, it would be really helpful, right? Because then we could just build
Just
it right into
preload
Restream
stuff, yeah.
and press it, and that's so cool.
We could even make our Twitch streams more interactive, like when we're
We
doing
could.
doing office hours. Just have other stuff in there that's going on along with whatever we're working on. That would be cool.
Would be very cool.
Okay.
So let's see here. Trying to think. So for anyone who's joining us, I want to. I guess what I could do, which I think is a service to people, is make folks aware of some of the efforts that we've been doing. What do you think, Blake? Do you think that's worthwhile?
Do it. Let them know.
Yeah. So if you're here for the first time, we talk about human factors. And if you're unaware what human factors is, it's kind of an umbrella term that encompasses many different disciplines. Things like user experience design, human factors, which is using cognitive psychology to inform the design of products and services and processes. And then also things like ergonomics, where you are, I guess I should have started the pre-show with all this, but, ergonomics, where we talk about things like, how well does a physical form match the human? So those types of things. It's kind of an umbrella discipline, which big umbrella. But for anyone who's watching, we do have a couple resources available to you if you're interested at all. We do a weekly human factors news. You know what? Maybe we could do that this week. Let's do that. I'm going to show the human factors news that we rounded up this week. This is Tuesday on Twitch. I go through and look up all the fun human factors things. We have, I talked about this in the pre-show, but cobots acting like puppies to better communicate with humans. We have Novid tracing app scans your social circle for COVID-19 risk, and expanding access to active transportation. Oh, hey, look, there we are. We're live right now on Periscope. And then
That's such a trip.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, right? And then we have some news. So the way we break this down, right? Our top news stories. This is what we talk about on the show. We give these to our patrons. They choose which one they want us to talk about. It's kind of cool. And then from there, we go down and these are the things that are interesting, or maybe we don't have access to because they're behind a paywall, but we still want others to be aware of. And these are the things that are like one-liners. And maybe we could talk about the one-liners this week.
Yeah, let's do it.
The effects of environmental, operational, and organizational factors on the usage and satisfaction of, usage of and satisfaction with electronic medical records. So this one was kind of cool. This one's talking about like medical records and how you have all these different things that impact how you use them and how satisfied people are with them. I didn't go into the full story. I think it's behind a paywall, but it seemed cool enough to like mention to folks, right? Yeah, and that's still highly topical because of the healthcare symposium.
Absolutely, yeah. The paywall thing still bothers me. I wish like stuff was a little bit more accessible, even if there is a paywall, like providing a fair amount of content to at least understand what's going on. Yeah,
ResearchGate is a good way to get around the paywalls if you find the authors on there. Intersection crash prediction methods for the Highway Safety Manual. This is looking at methods for predicting crashes at intersections. I just read that backwards. Managing work zone traffic impacts. I don't remember what this one is. Let's take a look. Let's see. This one was from Iowa State. I have them linked to the direct articles because I don't want people to have to click twice. I just want the access right there. Boom. Let's see. What are we looking at here?
Good old highway work zones.
Oh, yeah. Safety mobility impacts. Right. Okay. So this is when you're working on the highway, and what does that mean for safety and flow of traffic? And it was pretty cool. I didn't read through this whole thing, but it's kind of cool to see like how these work zones do impact safety, right? Like it's kind of cool. We're not going to deep dive into any of these. It's just kind of cursory overview at this point, but yeah, that was a cool one. Robots. Oh wait, sorry. Federal Aviation Administration's next generation air transportation system.
That's
cool.
Yeah. Wait. Can you click on that?
Yeah, I can.
Because next gen is what I worked on.
Oh, really?
1,000 years ago. Yeah, that was the
Next
stuff
gen
that
benefit.
I tested and all that kind of shit. Opportunities. Oh, all right.
Yeah, so it looks like it didn't keep pace with initial. What is next gen?
Next gen was like a
worked on it.
series of new technologies that were going to be implemented into the ATC scope to start handling things like handoffs, and basically it was both a system of systems redesign on top of like new software implementations. My thesis was based off of training methods for this.
Oh, that's super cool, dude.
Yeah.
Let's see here. 113 billion lower than the Joint Planning Development Office's initial projection. So yeah, so it sounds like, you know, they didn't meet the expectation or the prediction, but it there's still a lot of promise there, is what I'm reading from the title of this.
Yeah, makes sense. There's a lot going on in it. And I mean, it kind of
Yeah.
stands to reason with because a lot of the later work was focused on UAS stuff. And we both know from talking on this podcast and from my own friends who are in the field now, like trying to get all that stuff sorted out for the FAA so we can implement UAS in a different capacity has been a really big challenge. And that was part of what was going on in some of next gen.
That's cool, man. I'm glad you had an opportunity. Oh no, spoilers for what's coming up. Glad you had an opportunity to work on that and talk about it a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean that was my internship stuff for whatever you call it, grad school.
Super cool. All right, let's look at so robots versus toasters. How the power of movement plays tricks on human brains. I don't remember what this one was or why I picked it.
Because we're really bad at tracking motion, I'm imagining.
Oh yeah, our history with animals. Oh yeah, so this was kind of like anthropomorphizing the robots, and I think this kind of plays into the title story, or one of the title stories here. Cobots act like puppies to better communicate with humans. So it all kind of fits together, I think.
Yeah, that's like a nice
cool
synergy you've created there.
Thanks, man. Brand synergy. Researchers find individual training is key for autistic adolescents learning to drive. So that's pretty self-explanatory from the headline, but there's more detail, obviously, if you click on it. Video conferences are more exhausting when participants don't feel group belonging. So, Blake, if you don't feel group belonging in this two-person chat, then you would be more exhausted.
That's interesting.
It's very interesting.
I've had the opposite conversation with people I've worked with that like to be upfront about the fact that I get exhausted from too much human interaction. And I feel it a lot less with the video side. So that's interesting that it's actually shown to be the opposite for most.
Well, I mean, do you feel group belonging with your coworkers though? That's the thing. And if you were to have a video conference with people that you were unfamiliar with, like a networking event or something, you'd feel more exhausted. That's what it's saying, right?
Yeah.
Coworkers versus unknowns.
I feel like I'm an outlier there because I put myself in that situation all the time.
Yeah. Well, I guess. Yeah, probably. I feel more exhausted certainly when I have to network.
I mean, because that's my other job is talking to somebody brand new.
Yeah, that's true. You have a unique perspective on that. Objective analysis of stress in the classroom. That's very informative. I think that's what the title is. Yeah. The more difficult the task, the more stress occurs. But it's not that simple. Okay, cool. Well,
it's not that straightforward.
Look, mental effort causes stress. Whoa, no way.
What? I don't believe you.
Groundbreaking research. Researchers find new measure to predict stress resilience. That's cool. I think that's behind a paywall too. Maybe. No, it's a press release, so we'll see. I don't know what this method is. Neuroeconomists, psychologists, and physicians at the University of Zurich show that increased sensitivity in a specific region of the brain contributes to the development of anxiety and depression in response to real-life stress.
I love that so much.
An objective neurobiological measure for stress resilience in humans.
Killer. I love neuroscience. That was my first love.
Our attention is captured by eye glance. This one was interesting, I think. And you'll notice a vaguely familiar thing, and there's a reason I put that at the very bottom. Hang on. So our attention is captured by eye glance. So basically the TLDR of this, I think, is that when we are looking at each other with our eyeballs, there's some time dilation that goes on, some temporal dilation.
Makes sense.
Basically, I think we're underestimating the amount of time that our eyes are locked. So, so when we lock eyes, like if I were to look at you right in the eye, you watching this program, you are going to estimate that we are locking eyes for a lesser amount of time than we actually are, right? There's some visual temporal dilation going on with when you look at somebody else in the eyeballs. It's an illusion. So that's kind of cool. It's a temporal illusion.
That's a bit mind-blowing, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on illusions in grad school on not depth perception, but like distance perception. So like if you were to look over the edge of a building, you would overestimate the distance to the ground than it actually is.
Yes, it would.
But if you were to do that same estimation horizontally, you'd get it fairly accurately. And that's it's evolved navigation theory that talks about the overestimation of the vertical distance.
Whew.
And then I put this one last because it is news. It actually happened this week. But we had the headliner last week about the chief pilot talking about the challenges. And so that's the one I wanted to highlight. This is news, but it's not human factors, right? It's like, oh, cool, they actually did the thing. It's a follow-up to last week. That's all it is. And look, this is a good follow-up to the thing that we talked about. Look, here's the actual trajectory data that they got, and they're going to build that into their
that's going to the model.
Yeah, look, and here it is from 100 meters away. This is Ingenuity's first flight, as seen from the Perseverance rover, about 100 meters away. So that's so cool. It looks like there's going to be more data coming soon. If it's not already out there, it might be. But yeah, anyway, it was news, but it wasn't newsy enough to talk about because we already talked about it.
Not quite enough news.
Yeah. Well, hey, I guess we can just kind of go over what's coming up here. We have Human Factors News monthly roundup. So this will be a monthly roundup of everything that we've talked about for the last couple of weeks. We have a Q&A roundup where we'll talk about all the questions and answers that we've answered on the show. And one handy place for you, we've started a YouTube series.
You can find the playlist that Nick put together for that on our YouTube channel.
Yes, it's there. And then we have next week's news. And we have a recap of the roundup of what's going on with the healthcare symposium. This is not quite ready to go out yet because we are still waiting on some of the interviews to clear. But you can see who we did interview. Right? We had an interview with this. Let's start at the top. We had an interview with Rebecca Butler. She's the ops manager for MedStar Health. That was a fun one. I sat in on that one. I was kind of behind the scenes, but Elise kind of took the lead with that one. Elise also took the lead with Murti. You sat on with that one. Both really cool interviews. This one I actually hosted myself. This one was an interview with the Digital Student Health Design Competition winners. They call them Team Mothership. It's a really so basically they came together and talked about the app that they designed for this competition. They actually won the competition and talked with these lovely ladies yesterday. So we're still waiting on the clear to go through. But once it goes through, should hit live on your podcast feeds or YouTube and all that stuff. So that's what's coming up. Not quite ready. And we also, of course, did a recap. Elise and we sat down and talked about what we were hoping to attend and what we actually attended and kind of the structure of the symposium. It was fun. So that's what we have coming up.
Yeah, I'm
in our
excited to
blog
listen to the
post.
recap myself because there was definitely some stuff on the tracks that I would have loved to have like just gone through the talks. But getting you guys' take on the virtual aspect of it would be cool to know and listen to.
Yeah, it was yes, listen to the episode. I don't want to spoil it here. Definitely had a lot to talk about with the structure. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I can only imagine. Like trying to figure these things out is not that easy. I'm sure.
No.
There's a lot to go into it.
No,
Lot that goes into
no.
planning it because, like, even in the physical space, like sometimes those can be pretty overwhelming to get together. And now, like, take it to a brand new medium, all sorts of platform issues and all sorts of fun stuff. I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, hey, here I got another thing we can talk about here. It's patrons choose the news. They do that thing every week. They choose the news. So this is including the stories, and I've put a little tag in there so you can see which ones are new. New. So we talked about this one. I need to see which one didn't get. Oh yeah, this one totally didn't make the cut. This one didn't make the cut. I think these ones made the cut. This
the Cyber Farms is still there.
Yeah, these three made the cut. This one did not. So that's what we're looking at for next week. Choice of 6 stories. I'm going to start including the new tag there. Hi, everyone. What a busy news week.
That is nice. The new tag will give you a sense of what's carryover and what's not.
Yeah. I think I like it. So that one's going to be ending on 4/29 at 2 Pacific. Yeah, this is good to go out. Check that out.
There you go. It's ready to go.
It's ready to go. Look at that. Just like that. It's almost like I prepared it ahead of time.
Nah, there's no way. You did that all on the fly.
Any plans for the weekend, Blake? What you doing?
I am not really sure. I want to. So I got a bunch of plugins for my guitar tones and stuff like that I need to download, set up, route through Logic and all sorts of silly stuff. But I'm excited for that because it's like I got a bunch of basically plugins that are made by some of my favorite artists and some of my favorite producers, and there's music I want to write. So that's what I'm going to kind of focus on this weekend. Yeah. Meant to do it last weekend, but my laptop just totally was not having it. My back was way out of whack. But what are you up to, man? Yeah, I am an old person. It's awful.
Yeah. Last weekend we got out and we went to the beach, and it was a very refreshing experience because we hadn't been to the beach in years, and it was the first time with our son. So it was really nice. And then this weekend we're gonna get out and we're gonna go to the zoo locally and get the boy to see some animals. And then, of course, I can't forget, on Sunday morning, I will be tuning into Blake Arnsdorff's office hours on Twitch.
Yeah, just going to leave the laptop on through Sunday and turn off Sunday afternoon.
Basically.
But yeah, I'm stoked for that because there's some silly things that last time I did office hours, I opened up my code project and realized I had done something wrong. So it'll be fun to figure that out live.
What do you got planned for the office hours? Are you working on any of the like YouTube videos or your portfolio? Or
I'm going to do the portfolio just because like when I opened it last time at the tail end of my office hours, I realized that some directory is totally a mess and I don't know how to fix it. Oof. So it'll be interesting to go through and try and get everything back up and running. I might show some of my process for the YouTube video stuff because I updated it a bit based off the first template that I made. So I might start with that. And then go from there. Yeah, because that stuff's coming along pretty well.
Yeah. I'm digging the video production going on over here.
I think the next step, I want to mess around in After Effects a little bit since I have access to all that stuff and do some other stuff. Because I like the original, it came from Reddit Thunderstorm that Jeff was so awesome to build and provide for us. But since we're doing it from so many different places, I kind of want them included in it came from pre-roll. So trying to figure it out.
It'd be very cool. Yeah. I'd love to see, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe you could do that for office hours one of these days, right? Just kind of show, what you can do with, like, I don't know. We can let's have a show meeting right now. What would you like to see for that visual. Like I have no thoughts on it. I don't know if I'm necessarily happy with the at the time it's exactly what I wanted because we were just pulling from Reddit, but now we pull from so many places that it's like I don't know if that's the visual I want. And I don't know if it matches the tone of the show anymore, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I think it's I think we've moved in a different direction. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely thinking of something close and in the vein to what you've done, at least how we like with some of the stuff you made in Camtasia, just because it's using the branding heavily, it's playing off of that. I still like the sound clip because I think it does bring a fun element to it.
Yeah.
But we'll see how it kind of all pans out together. But basically, I want to be able to bring in the various different platforms that we do tackle in a given week. So kind of make it a little bit special depending on what it is, because that's very simple in After Effects. But bring in basically like Discord logos, a nicely cut Patreon logo, and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I think we could do that. I'd be interested to see like maybe I don't know, man. Like I'm thinking like a two-way animation, you know, where one thing's moving one way, one thing's moving another way, like a top and bottom, maybe like it came from in the middle, and you have like all these different things, like a Slack interface, and you have like a Patreon interface, and you have like a Reddit interface, and you have like a Twitter interface, and you have a Facebook, and you know, like LinkedIn and all that stuff, just like scrolling across where with questions that we've answered on the show, you know, like that might be kind of cool. Discord is in there too, and we got Slack.
Absolutely.
That might be kind of cool. Like just example questions that we've taken from all these different platforms as a way to communicate like, hey, look, we really search everywhere for all these things.
Absolutely.
That might be kind of cool. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the two things moving in different ways. I just think of when I think of like newsy, like, hey, look at all this stuff that we've done.
Yep. All this like stuff coming at you.
Anyway, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here. I don't know how much more we have to talk about. We kind of did a lot of it before the show. Sorry about that, but I think we kind of shifted, and this was probably one of the better post shows that we've done too. So
yeah, absolutely. Coming along real nice.
Yeah, if you've been hanging out with us on any of the platforms we're streaming on, YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, Twitter, whatever, thank you so much. We really appreciate you hanging out here with us live. Really does kind of help us understand that there are people out there watching the show, and it's kind of fun. So thank you. We'll be back here again on Sunday morning. Blake is going to be doing his office hours. What time is that? 9:30?
9:30 to 10:30
a.m. Pacific.
Yep.
There you go. And I will be back Tuesday at 11 Pacific, 11 a.m. Yeah, from there, thank you all so much for tuning into the stream. Until next time, we'll see you then.
It depends.
I don't know if we do that in the post show. All right.